So hi everybody, hope you're doing well. My name is Jen, welcome to Law Hero, and today I'm very excited to do a very broad video called An Introduction to the Irish Legal System, which is inspired by Bernard McCutcheon. I've been getting really into kind of bread and butter stuff and trying to test myself a little bit about my own knowledge. So I want to share my learning with you, and this video is for absolutely everybody, for Irish, non-Irish, for people who are starting off, for people who are like in the game a good bit like me. It's basically so important to understand the socio-economic, cultural, historical, sociological impact that law has on us, and the legal environment in which we operate is like we cannot detach ourselves from it. So I think it's just very important to refresh yourselves every so often. I call it like blue skies thinking, or kind of taking a step back and like, okay, where do we sit in this system? Yeah, so that's what we're going to do today. So the very first point is like, what is the law? And I know it seems very, very basic and rudimentary, but it is something I didn't really consider before, because if you think about like in German law, you have Gesetz. So Gesetz is a law, as in legislation, whereas Recht is the law as a whole, and we don't have that distinction in English. And I think it's important to realize that. So when we say laws, we mean like legislation, or when we say the law, we mean the body or the system that encapsulate all different types of law, be it like precedent, which is judge-made law, legislation, custom, international law, EU law, all of that. So that's the first thing I didn't really consider, but it is true. And so an understanding of legal rules is based on an understanding of legal systems. So that's the difference. Laws is the legal rule, and the law is the legal system. The law, as in the system, explains the origin of the rules, their relationship with another, and their place in the overall system. While the law is composed of laws, it also embraces more. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And again, that was something I didn't really consider. So the Irish legal system is a common law system as opposed to a civil or a European system. That being said, Japan has a civil law system, so it's not strictly European. But as you know, we inherited from the English, and more specifically after the invasion of the Normans in 1066 with our man Strongbow. And after that, common law became the system of law in Ireland. Before that, we had like Brehon law, which is also very interesting, and actually might do a Law Hero video on that someday. But basically, common law is a legal system which indicates that it's English in origin, so usually anywhere where the British Empire has colonised, and it's an identifiable body of law, and it's similar across most jurisdictions. There are some nuances. For example, if you look at like Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, the basic rules are the same, but there are certain nuances, and you have to be very careful, especially if you are a solicitor who goes to qualify in another area. For example, English and Irish law have lots of differences. One off the top of my head is the Misrepresentation Act in English law. We don't have it codified in this country, so it's not exactly the same. But just to be aware that basically it's the same. And usually Ireland follows England as regards legislation. Usually. It depends though. For example, the abortion referendum and the marriage referendum, they were very much from a cultural perspective. They were ones we did on our own. But usually if there's some sort of administrative procedural or, so non-human areas like finance, we will follow suit. So common law was basically judge-made decisions that was adhered to rigorously. So precedent or stare decisis was very important in common law. and it wasn't codified as opposed to like the BGB in Germany, or the Code Civil in France. That was the big difference. The term common law also bears another meaning. It refers to body law that was developed in English common law courts. In this sense, it may be contrasted with equity, which is a body of law that was developed by the courts of chancery. And I've gone through that in many videos. So the next question in Ireland is, what are our sources of law? And in Ireland, obviously, we have the doctrine of precedent, which means the common law is binding on the judge, whoever is making the decision. We also have legislation, which comes from Article 15.2, the Constitution. We have a legislative system. We have the Oireachtas, which means legislator in Irish, and that is our national parliament. And then we delegate legislation, then 15.2.2, to certain bodies or individuals that carry out the work of the legislator, basically. It's like our bureaucracy. Our constitution came into force in 1937, and it is a very interesting document with kind of like the fundamental principles of how we run our state, so guarantees around liberty and freedom, health, socioeconomic rights. It's funny, I said health and then I sneezed, and that kind of thing. And that is our constitution. By virtue of being a member of the EU, Britain is no longer a member of the EU since last December. We also have to adhere to European Union law. Custom is an interesting one, actually, because it very rarely comes up. So for a custom to be binding, or for a custom to actually operate. So moving on from custom, we also have international law, which is very important globally. It governs the relationships between states, essentially. And you also have international criminal law, which is like a subcategory of international law. And but that has filtered down from states to like individuals, businesses, through human rights treaties, international trade agreements. So basically the sources of international law are customary international law, treaties, international decisions of judicial bodies. And it's become more and more codified as time has gone on. And then in terms of the Irish system, we run, like we do with the EU, a dualist system, whereby to become part of our national law, well, actually no, sorry, this is only as regards international law. And an international measure must be specifically incorporated by domestic legal instrument, whereas, as we know, in EU law, regulations have direct effect. And in Article 29.6 of our Constitution, we haven't incorporated this. Another important point to mention is the European Convention of Human Rights, which forms the basis of the European Convention on Human Rights Act 2003 in Irish law, is also an important international legal instrument that you cannot set aside in Irish law. And for example, it was that act that was used around privacy, and it has really a lot of force in the courts, especially around freedoms as well. Canon law also is a source of Irish law, but really plays a little if no role anymore. Commentaries and scholarly writing are used as authoritative source of law. They're important, but they're only really persuasive, they're not binding. Now, we're coming on to the divisions of law, and this is something which a lot of FE1 students need to listen up to, because most FE1 students who I tutor are very poor on this. So in Irish law, we have a broad distinction between substantive law, procedural law, and adjectival law. So substantive law can be divided into public and private law. So your public law is your constitutional law, relationship between the state and the citizen. Administrative law would be, for example, like your semi-state bodies, your Gardaí, Defence Forces, HSE. That would be administrative law. It's basically the law of how public authorities uphold themselves, and that's why judicial review and administrative law go together, because a judicial review is a review of a decision of an administrative or a public body authority. And then criminal law is also public because it's an offence against the public at large. Private law then, as opposed to public law, is our relationships with each other. And these are through contract law, property law, and tort. And then there's another subdivision of those laws, which would be like company law, family law, employment law, like IPIT, all of those. So I have an ebook on jurisprudence which goes through legal theory, but legal theory is very, very important to understand in the scheme of the legal system, because legal theory is what drives legislation and reasoning. So legal theory is like is the backbone behind the reasoning that judges employ. Judges will read they'll read academic scholars and all of that, but all of that comes from jurisprudence, which is the scientific legal theory. And the different types, so like, you know, positivism, natural law, and the role of rights, the influence of, you know, Christianity on law, that kind of thing. And then law and morality then is a major theme in jurisprudence, because that's where, you know, the natural law arguments come from. For example, that certain rights or certain acts are inherent, that they're God-given, and there's been a lot of debate in constitutional law around that. And then finally in this video, I would just like to touch on the rule of law and as a principle in democratic states. Now, if you go abroad to other states like I did, to Germany, you will also see the rule of law play a very profound role. And the reason is because of not only legal certainty, but it comes from a top down. If there's legal certainty at state level, legal certainty among citizens, it's a mechanism to ensure peace. And it says here that it's referred to as the principle of legality. The values implicit in the rule of law transcend and permeate the various sources of law. Thus, a particular principle might take legal effect as a common law rule, a section of an act of the Oireachtas, and a constitutional provision. Central to the rule of law is the idea of limited governmental power. For example, and so the separation of powers ensures a distribution of government power among different organs of state, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The relation between the organs is one of checks and balances, with no one organ enjoying supremacy at the expense of the others. And we see this in constitutional law, we do it a lot. The details of this governmental structure vary from one state to another, but a crucial feature to all democratic societies is the notion of limited power. And that's why a lot of the time an argument of ultra vires is used in administrative law or judicial review proceedings. There is also in the rule of law, there is a hostility towards retrospective acts, basically unfair, and this is encapsulated in the maxims nulla crimen sine lega and nulla poena sine lega. So no crime without law and no punishment without law, and these are actually also in Germany. And they are amplified by Article 15.5 of the Constitution, which says that the Oireachtas shall not declare acts to be infringement of the law which were not so at the date of their commission. And this comes up so many times in the constitutional law FE1, that at the time of committing the act, people didn't realise that it was they didn't realise it was prohibited. Moreover, the courts adopt a presumption against retrospection when interpreting legislation. There's also other areas around the rule of law. So, for example, like law is supposed to facilitate commerce, and that means that like legal information is made readily available. Law should be understandable and in opaque and in unintelligible terms. Laws which are vague can be potentially unconstitutional. Laws should be clear. There's a tension between the demand of intelligibility and precision, which means that you want to make it clear enough to anyone to understand the law, but at the same time it needs to be complicated enough that all bases are covered and that there are exceptions to rules. That's kind of the tightrope on which the rule of law operates. So I hope that was informative. The next day we are moving on to the legal profession and an analysis of the legal profession in Ireland, a little bit more deeper than we've gone before, a little bit more theoretical. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I'll see you in the next one.